Few images are as central to the imaginal language of heroism than the slaying of the dragon. But what is the dragon, and where does it dwell? In this video, which is a follow-up to the hero's slaying of the animal self video, I want to go through a few relevant dragon-slaying myths in terms of what they mean for the spiritual life. The first point to make, laying out my interpretative framework, is that the ubiquity of a sacrificial or tamed beast, the bulls of the sun in Greek myth, the Passover lamb in the Bible, and a serpent or dragon antagonist, present two fundamental steps in the spiritual life. The slaying of the animal self, which is the calming of the mind and body, its constant reactions, constant oscillating need to be stimulated. That's the bull or the lamb. The bull is a beast of burden. The lamb is a submissive animal. The idea is that the Agnus Dei is a submissive sacrifice that accepts its sacrifice. So the animal, the body mind has been tamed, has been mortified, and is ready to be suspended. And then subsequently having to face a reaction from that part of us that identifies with continuous thought and activity, that thinks it's dying when you set the ordinary reactions aside during deep contemplative practice, the primal fear of the instincts. That's the dragon or the serpent. Once you calm the mammalian instincts, you have to deal with the deeper reptilian mind and its thirst for life, its profound primal fear of death. In general, we encounter the dragon during the spiritual journey to the center of the self, the heart, the axis mundi. It's when we're trying to center ourselves that we encounter this violent reaction, this contrary force. I'm psychologizing these figures, but the dragon can also stand for something genuinely external to the seeker, which is, by virtue of our ignorance or unhealthy attachments, setting up a presence in us, instrumentalizing and tyrannizing our own instincts, a real spiritually destructive influence out there in the world. That's when the serpent appears in its more sinister guise. The form of the lashing out of that deeper stratum of the passions that we are afflicted by has to do with intrusive thoughts, powerful fear or desire. So it's a particularly venomous attack of the mind or of the body, in a certain sense, that we are now having to deactivate. As an aside, before continuing, dragons have other meanings too, obviously benevolent ones, especially in cultures like the Chinese. And there's a difference between winged and wingless dragons as well that I'm not going to explore here. We're just dealing with a particular type of dragon, the most prominent meaning of the dragon/serpent in Western lore as antagonist. So let's start with a few myths. Heracles, first of all. At the end of the hero's journey, his 12 labors, he goes to a western land, to the island of the Hesperides, and sometimes it's mentioned as Hesperia, the west, the far west, being the land of sundown, dusk. When the sun goes down in the west, this is a place of death. It's where the light goes out. So in a sense, it's the outer darkness, the edge of life. Hercules is facing death. But this is also somehow the center, because this is near where Atlas holds up the whole sky over the earth, at the Atlas Mountains in North Africa on the way to the Hesperides. Facing the end, death, the edge of the world, the place of outer darkness, the place where the sun itself is devoured by night, is also facing the truth of ourselves as mortal beings. And so it connects us with the center, the axial point at which the sky is held up, so to speak. Heracles has already retrieved the animal self by now, the bulls of the sun, which had been stolen by a tyrant in the western land, by a giant, so that by now the body and mind are under his will. He's overcome that first basic important trial. Heracles must now slay the dragon Ladon, the deeper primal fear, before receiving the fruit of immortality, the apples of the Hesperides. We have a return to Eden at the end of Hercules' story. The dragon is defeated and a new garden, as heavenly city, may descend. The idea of defeating the dragon and then entering into the presence of the fruit of immortality, receiving the fruit of the Hesperides, is the same as what we get in the Apocalypse. The dragon is finally defeated, the tree of life yields new fruit, and the same pattern occurs in tales around the Norse god Thor. He journeys to the center by going to the outermost edge, to death, equivalent to Hercules going to the western edge of dusk. There, Thor finds the Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, who encircles the whole world with its huge tail-like body. Again, this encircling, this Ouroboros, has to do with the cycles of nature. He's trying to get beyond that. In order to catch it, Thor throws an ox's head as bait. So this is precisely the same symbolism that we had before. We slay the animal self, the beast of burden self. Hercules retrieves the oxen of the sun that had been taken by a giant, we might say by the disordered ego, and that brings up the deeper primal reptile self that reacts violently to our efforts. So he throws out, Thor does, the head of the ox, and the serpent rears its head, catches it as bait. Unfortunately, Thor is with the giant Ymir, who is too fearful of the whole thing, so he cuts the fishing line so that the Midgard serpent is able to get away. In a sense, Hercules was able to steal away the oxen of the sun from the giant that had stolen it, but in the case of Thor, the giant that accompanies him is thwarting his efforts to go to the next trial, the equivalent of Hercules defeating Ladon. Sometimes our grosser, coarse ego, Ymir, gets afraid and retreats from the exercise. But in a way, this is good. We should be gradual in our approach to spiritual practice, to entering that deep silence of prayer. You can't do it all at once. And Thor will face the serpent again during Ragnarok, during the apocalypse, right? When the dragon is finally defeated, as in the Bible. Thor is prophesied to kill the Midgard serpent with his hammer and to die from its venom after taking 9 steps afterwards, which I take to be metaphorical for Thor's ultimate rebirth. 9 is a symbol of rebirth, like 9 months of pregnancy. So we can imagine a transformed final form Thor, free of the old serpent, resurrecting. Staying in the north, we have the story of Siegfried, who defeats Fafnir, a dwarf turned dragon. So Fafnir represents a part of our instincts, our forging faculties, the busy powers of the body and mind, the dwarves, but that has grown monstrous, out of sync with the rest, hypertrophic. It's reacting in a purely reptilian, primitive way. Another dwarf, Regin, makes a sword for Siegfried that initially breaks when Siegfried tries to use it, so that instead of facing the dragon head on, Siegfried has to dig a pit in Fafnir's path, at the place where the dragon travels to drink water. Siegfried hides in this pit, kind of like the edge of the world, facing death. Hercules in the far west, Thor in the outer edge. We have the idea of Jesus descending during the 3 days in the tomb, because it is kind of like a tomb that Siegfried has dug in the ground. When Fafnir slides over that tomb, that pit, Siegfried stabs the dragon from below in its belly, which is not covered by protective scales. Siegfried is actually rendered near invulnerable by the dragon's blood, which then rains on him from the wound, which is symbolically equivalent to how the blood of the Lamb protects believers and allows them to defeat the dragon in John's Apocalypse. That's the language used in the Apocalypse. The blood of the Lamb allows for the defeat of the dragon. And of course, Passover blood protected the households of Israelites in the Exodus. So Siegfried receiving this blood and being invulnerable because of it, nearly, carries the same symbolic weight. Turning to Christian folklore, we have St. George. Once upon a time, a city was being terrorized by a dragon. The people had been sacrificing their children, who they would choose by lot, so arbitrarily, randomly, in order to appease the beast's hunger. Then came the turn for the king's own daughter to be offered up to the dragon. Dutifully, the princess goes to face her death, but it happens that a Roman soldier by the name of George is traveling nearby. So he tells the people that he will slay this monster and save the princess, but they have to embrace Christianity. So they agree, and he's able to drive a lance through the beast, making the sign of the cross. And in some accounts, we have the people converting after seeing the power of the sign of the cross over the dragon. So it seems like the evil of the dragon was spiritual, not just physical. It can't be beaten through brute force alone, but by purifying the people themselves, as if it was drawing power from their spiritual darkness. We can also understand the princess as representing the people, and so she is saved when they convert, the way that the church is a collective body of believers and is identified as a woman, the wife of the Lamb in the Apocalypse, the church as bride. And these themes recur. In China, you have Li Bing encountering a woman whose grandson is going to be sacrificed to a dragon to prevent floods. And so he restrains it sometimes through the use of water from a mystical pool. So again, the relationship with water. In West Africa, in Soninke culture, a serpent named Bida was the source of fertility, rain. Each year a virgin had to be sacrificed to it, however. And when it came the turn of the fiancé of a man called Wagadu, he slayed the beast. In Cherokee culture, there's the Uktena, a horned serpent with a diamond on its forehead, called Ulun Suti, which would render one a great wonder worker. And Uktena is finally defeated by a certain Aganunitsi. That would be an instance of the dragon stone trope. You have the Jewish story of Rabbi Akiva, a mystical figure whose daughter is cursed to be bitten by a snake on her wedding day, but she gives to the poor on that day and breaks the curse. Muslim tradition tells of the miraculous waters of Zamzam that were occupied by serpent-shaped jinn when Muhammad conquered the city of Mecca. And so these snake-like beings were cleared out just as the idols were cleared out of the Kaaba. So again, these symbols recur from China to sub-Saharan Africa to the Americas to the Middle East and Europe. The dragon, the serpent, is a false self claiming dominion over reality. It's, in John's Apocalypse, the devil who seems to be sovereign over a fallen world, marshalling kings and demons before its final inevitable ousting, its defeat. As false self and sovereign, it blocks our way to our own self and to our own true sovereign perception of our own genuine spiritual origin in the divine. Now, the serpent is basic life, base reptilian instincts. No legs, just devouring head and tail, close to the ground, the bottom of creation. It's also often the cycles of nature and life, the constant cyclical patterns of the mind and of instinct and of desire. That's represented by the Ouroboros, the snake that bites its own tail. Cyclical nature. This is not bad in itself, but becomes an instrument of evil because it becomes a trap. When we are spiritually dead, when our will is dormant, we are slaves to those instincts, to those cycles of nature, of body, of ever-churning thought. That's how it appears in early modern European alchemical symbolism, for example. Writings associated with Bernardo of Treviso present the Ouroboros as surrounding the fountain of life, blocking, in a sense, the path to rebirth. Writes Jung in Aion of the dragon/serpent as primal instinct. Quote, "Since the shadow in itself is unconscious for most people, the snake would correspond to what is totally unconscious and incapable of becoming conscious, but which, as the collective unconscious or as instinct, seems to possess a peculiar wisdom of its own, and a knowledge that is often felt to be supernatural. This is the treasure which the snake or dragon guards, and also the reason why the snake signifies evil and darkness on the one hand and wisdom on the other. Its unrelatedness, coldness, and dangerousness expresses the instinctuality that with ruthless cruelty rides roughshod over all moral and any other human wishes and considerations. A chthonic spirit who dwells in matter, more especially in the bit of original chaos hidden in creation, the massa confusa, End quote. Of course, once overcome, this is energy. It's the powers of the instinct of the body, one of their deepest stratum. Made vertical, Moses placing a snake vertically on a pole, the snake on the caduceus of Hermes, the kundalini in Indian tradition. Jesus says the faithful take up snakes, unaffected by their poison. This idea of taking up the snake is the idea of raising up the energy of the serpent, of the kundalini, etc. Obviously, those can be taken in a sinister way, those symbols and those ideas. And I don't go along with Jung that it's the wisdom of instinct or the collective unconscious that is the treasure which the dragon hides and guards in these myths. I think it's something genuinely spiritual which is not reducible to the collective unconscious or to instinct. It's actually beyond it. It's when you enter that deeper level of spiritual contemplation which initially the reptilian instinctive self resists because it's afraid of being suspended and allowing you into those deeper layers of contemplation. I want to read some passages from René Guénon's Symbolism of the Cross on the dragon as keeper and corrupter, depending on our spiritual state, of the cosmic center, our foe on the journey back to the center of the self, the heart, the fountain of immortality, perception of the divine. Guénon writes, quote, "The serpent or dragon, which is then an equivalent of it, as the guardian of certain symbols of immortality, the approach to which it forbids, we find coiled round the tree with the golden apples in the garden of the Hesperides, or the beech tree in the wood at Colchis, on which the golden fleece hangs." That's in the story of Jason and the Argonauts. These trees are clearly further forms of the tree of life, the world axis. The serpent is found coiled not only around a tree, but also a number of other symbols of the world axis, and especially the mountain, as in the Hindu tradition and the symbolism of the churning of the sea, and often the serpent or dragon appears as the guardian of hidden treasure, such as those of the black stone or subterranean fire, end quote. So this is more how I view things, right? Jung is saying, well, it's instinct, it's the collective unconscious, and perhaps he's also pointing to something beyond that and had a sense for that. We should recall that black stones that Guénon is mentioning here are often central. Also in Roman religion, the palladium that is said to be brought by Aeneas, the Trojan hero who really founds Roman civilization, is often identified as a meteoric stone. Aeneas brings it to Italy, and it becomes central to the foundation of future Rome, the Roman Kaaba, we could say. We should also add that for the Pythagoreans, the center of the cosmos was imagined to be a fire and a cube. You have to enter the center to access totality. The bottom of the earth connects with the top of heaven. Once more, volcano, meteor, female, male, the outer edge, that's also the center, the Hesperides, but that's for another video. Concerning the symbol of the center as a stone, bedrock of the self, holy mountain in sort of miniature, the philosopher's stone, Carl Jung deals with this in Aeon as well, and it's also dual in its meaning, again, depending on our state, like the dragon itself. Quote, "The stone is twin or twofold. The one is opaque and black, the other, though black, is brilliant and shining like a mirror. This is the stone which many seek without finding it, for it is the dragon's stone, Dracontius lapis." End quote. We have the white stone in the Apocalypse bearing the secret name of the faithful. Each one receives this white stone as he is saved. The Muslims say that the Kaaba stone descended white from paradise and became black on earth. Jung continues, quote, "It was reputed to be a precious stone which could be obtained by cutting off the head of a sleeping dragon. But it becomes a gem only when a bit of the dragon's soul remains inside. The gem is of a white color." End quote. I would relate the dragon stone to the Holy Grail. The story of the Holy Grail, in some versions, has it that it was a stone that fell off the crown of Lucifer when he fell. It was then made into the Grail. So that part of the cosmic architecture which is dragged down, caused to fall by spiritual pride, dislodged by rebellion, is won back and precisely allows us holiness. Being a stone upon a crown, upon the brow, we may relate it to mental focus and contemplation. If your eye is single, your whole body is full of light, as the gospel puts it. This brings us to an important aspect of all of these stories of overcoming the dragon. In these stories, we constantly get the idea that the dragon has to be defeated with cunning, intelligently, indirectly, in a subtle way, spiritually. Be as innocent as doves and as cunning as snakes, says Jesus. Jung is talking about tales in which the dragon's head has to be cut off while it's asleep. Heracles defeats Ladon, but his journey involves an element of trickery because Atlas gets the hero at one point to pick up the burden of holding the sky for him, and Heracles has to reverse the trickery by asking Atlas to take the sky again for a moment so that he can adjust his robe, which is uncomfortable. And when Atlas agrees, Heracles obviously doesn't resume being a pillar for the sky. He continues on his way. Thor lures the Midgard serpent with bait, the head of the ox, and actually has to have his quest delayed until Ragnarok to defeat the serpent finally. Siegfried has to hide in a pit, a tomb, to cut Fafnir from below. St. George has to convert the people first before dispelling the evil of the dragon who terrorizes them. In every case, the mission is approached indirectly in some sense. There's an element of resist not evil, as Jesus teaches, in all successful dragon slayers. When the fear of death and mental lashing out assails us, we do not argue with them or stay in the contemplative practice obstinately. We have to dose our spiritual practice carefully. This idea is all over traditions. You have to find a balance. You have to be cunning. In the Bible, the dragon is first released in order to be defeated. You let it go a little bit, but even there, like with Ragnarok, it's not defeated straight away. First it's been locked up, then it's released again. So it goes by phases. And this idea that you have to accept that there are going to be phases, you have to be patient, is really important to the operation, lest you face the dragon in its full ferocious form before you're ready and get devoured. And I really want to emphasize this idea that postponing the death of the dragon till Ragnarok in the case of Thor, and locking the dragon up and then releasing it later in the apocalypse, these have a lot to do with each other. The paradoxical idea that the periphery or edge of life is also the center that we've talked about is often presented as a journey into the outer waters or into a watery balm. The paradoxical periphery or edge of life, yet center, is often presented as watery, the ocean surrounding the edge of the earth for Thor, the pit on the way to Fafnir's drinking hole in Siegfried's story, Heracles sailing to the Hesperides, the island. And so we may liken it to the womb as well as to a tomb. There's a very interesting passage in a work called the Philosophumena, or the Refutation of All Heresies, by Bishop of Rome Hippolytus, who lived in the 2nd and early 3rd centuries AD, concerning how some Christians, presumably heretical Christians, I think this is about heretical Christians, approached the symbolism of the gospel. Quote, "The perfect word of the light on high, the Logos, having been made like the beast, the serpent," so this is analogous to Jesus being cast in the role of a criminal, a wretched one, "entered into the unpurified womb," we could say the world, the earth, mortal life, "beguiling it by its likeness to the beast, so that it might lose the bands which encircle the perfect mind. This is the form of the slave, and this the need for the descent of the word of God into the womb of a virgin. But in truth, after entering into the foul mysteries of the womb, he was washed and drank of the cup of living water." End quote. The inner parts of us, the womb-like waters, are blocked by the false self, or the reactive stratum of the self when it takes control, the serpent, primal reptilian fear. Once pacified, they are the overflowing holy grail, the renewal of the self, the living waters. We enter the depths and return. This is spiritual rebirth, the idea of being born again, that's mentioned across traditions, being born from above, per the gospel. The idea of the infested womb, the deep contemplative parts of us being cut off so that we cannot become as children, as Jesus says, connects us to the idea that our origin is blocked from us. Our perception of our own originating source of God has been occluded, so that instead we are subject to a false origin. We perceive primitive instinct and fear as having primacy over us. The serpent seems to be our father or parent, the true sovereign and king of the earth. Thus, the motif of the snake stealing the baby. In the Apocalypse, the dragon waits to devour the pregnant woman's savior son. We have Python after Leto's son Apollo. We have the snake sent to murder the infant Heracles. The false father, who is also a false womb, is the Saturn of the myth of devouring his children. This myth about Saturn, who is often linked to the serpent in medieval alchemical symbolism, is the core of the perversion of spirituality. Jung notes the relation of Saturn to dragon at one point in Aeon, for example. We don't perceive the divine origin. Instead, all things come from nothing, so far as we can tell. Life from inanimate matter, higher thought from ancient animal instinct. The relation of son to father, of creation to creator, is antagonistic here, because the origin is chaos. Spirituality becomes an arbitrary slaying of the prior order of gods by new upstarts who may build on them. In biblical narrative, the dragon is indeed evil authority, per Ezekiel's reading of Isaiah, which is initially cast out by Michael, per John's Apocalypse, and finally defeated. Revelation 12:11 mentions that believers conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. So again, first the animal self is slain, then, by the blood of the Lamb, the dragon. Now, the idea that the dragon is defeated by the blood of the Lamb is interesting because it means Pharaoh in Exodus is, in some sense, the dragon. It was with blood from Passover lamb, in Exodus 12, that the Israelites protect themselves against death and initiate their final exodus from Egyptian slavery. The blood of the slain animal self protects us from death. If we properly subdue the reactive mind and body, the impulses, we can overcome spiritual death, the ordinary dulling of awareness, somnambulism, in which we usually go about our lives. We can overcome sleep and enter into contemplation. If we really have defeated the animal self, trained the body and mind properly, when the deeper reactions, because of course it won't go without a fight, it won't be able to drag us away ultimately from our path. The blood of the Lamb will protect us from that trial. We can leave the old dwelling place, the old slavery, Egypt, by crossing the Red Sea, and I would argue that the Red Sea, red like blood, and the blood of the Lamb are analogous. To slay the Lamb is to part the Red Sea, to master the ever-ebbing and flowing waters of the instincts and the mind and the body. Walking on water has a similar meaning as well. And so we progress and we are pursued by the old self, the reactions, the serpent, oppressive, obsessive authority, angry Pharaoh, but we should not engage it, at least not directly. We have to continue on our way and it will drown behind us if we don't turn back, like the wife of Lot who turned back and was destroyed. If you put your hand on the plow, then you don't turn back, as Jesus says. You have to keep going forward. It's this idea once more that the dragon is defeated through some kind of subterfuge, indirectly, in a subtle way, intelligently. Jesus as Passover lamb precisely teaches this process. His non-reaction on the cross, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do," is letting the satanic authorities drown in the Red Sea, the water and blood that flow down and lift the blindness from the Roman Longinus. Spiritual darkness, blindness, have been defeated. To close off, the reactive instincts, the dragon, will lash out against us after we succeed in initially entering contemplation. You face in gospel terms, fasting in the desert, you've gone up on the cross, and now you have to face the lance of Longinus, or the 3 days in Hades, in the tomb. And that's kind of silent contemplation, wordless prayer, formless. And if the reaction is too powerful, you have to dose it by going back to the previous phase, focusing the mind again, rather than fully detaching from its content. So again, the words of prayer, the sensation of prayer beads on the fingers, these kinds of classic techniques. That's like going back to the desert, to the fast. So you remain conscious, deliberate, aware, present. You don't fall asleep into the exercise, but you also don't react, bring too much energy, too much attention to those sudden spasms of the instincts that want to break from the contemplative practice. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that was more or less clear and interesting. If you enjoy this kind of content, consider becoming a paid member on my Substack or a monthly contributor on my Buy Me a Coffee. Subscribe if you would like to. Thank you very much, and until next time.